there was a scientist called Dr. David Hawkins, who in somewhere, I believe, close to the 60s or 70s, I was reading his book, very fucking dry. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend you read his book, but I was doing for research. What he wanted to do was he wanted to study how human beings like actually the vibration they actually gave off when they were feeling certain emotions. Now we have a whole spectrum of fucking emotions, right? Right from anger to sadness to grief to like, you know, elation to hope. But it was important for him to study this, to study the actual frequency given off by the body. So he used an electroencephalogram and other equipment to measure the electric discharges the body would give off when it felt a vibration. And it was so incredibly powerful because he was able to actually attribute, you know how we say, I want to be in a high vibration, I want to have someone in a high vibration, or I feel that person's low vibration. He was actually able to associate a lot of the emotions people were feeling with those things. So you can now see for yourself what Christina is going to show you and take you through how certain emotions actually relate to a vibration. Take it away, Christina.
So here is the scale. Okay. And so if you look at the bottom, so we have like shame and guilt, apathy, which is, you know, more of just like depression down at the bottom, apathy, grief, fear, desire. And so, you know, when you're looking at like feeling these feelings, as I said, it's important not to just be like, oh, you know what, I need to feel enlightened and peaceful and joyful about this situation. So like, I'm just going to like go straight there. So, that's where kind of like that whole like good vibes only thing gets kind of messy, because you do want to be able to fully honor what you're feeling, let it settle, but then also have that like that gentle reparenting to be like, okay, like, you know, it's going to be okay. Like we're going to get through this. You know, I love you so much. I know this is really tough right now. So just like feel it out, like do what you got to do. But, you know, once you kind of get to that point, it's like, okay, like, well, what can we do to make you feel like a little bit better? And so if you're kind of down here at like this apathy, this grief, you know, you can look at, okay, well, like, what can I do to just feel a little bit better? So the neutrality or like the acceptance, it could be something that, you know, you aim for, where you're just like, okay, like you know, this event happened. I'm neither like, you know, I'm just kind of like neutral about it, or just like even accepting it. As hard as this is to hear, the only thing in life that is guaranteed to any of us is death. You are not guaranteed to live more than a day. You're not guaranteed to fall in love, to have kids, to have a family, any of those things. And that's what life is. It's all about these opposing, you know, components like light and darkness, life and death. And so really, you know, and it's not to be callous, it's just a means to say, you know, like death is a part of life. Moving up this scale. So looking at like, what was the purpose? He passed away almost 20 years ago. So, you know, this does take a while to get to. And that's why I always like tell everyone, this is not to mitigate or to invalidate your feelings. It's always really important to pay attention to your feelings first and foremost. But you also have to reflect and ask yourself this existential question of, is this impeding and getting in the way of me living a really full life? Because if we stay in these lower states of vibration, then we're just going to be living in survival mode. And you guys are all here because you don't want to be in survival mode. You want to be living in this ultimate state of consciousness. You want to be moving up this flow chart, really. And so when I'm looking at like my own father's passing, it's like, okay, well, like, what's the lesson? And I know that can be a hard question to even consider. You're like, well, what the fuck? Like somebody died. It's sad. There's no rhyme or reason. It's awful. And, you know, you're right. Like it is really awful. And this is, again, not to invalidate any of those awful, terrible feelings that you have. But when you're looking at what was, you know, like the purpose of it, you know, for me, it really taught me about just like the preciousness of life. And somebody close to me that we were talking about death very openly. And he told me, he said, you know, the best way to honor the dead is to live fully. And I really kept that by my heart. And that's how I've been living for a while, because for a while I was living in the survival state. And then I realized like, I want to live. I have a really wild heart and I want to, you know, see the world. I want to love. I want to open my heart again. And so for me, I just looked at how precious life is, and really to honor the dead, the best way to do that is through living. And so that's kind of really how I worked kind of through that, kind of just in brevity. And then, kind of paralleling this to relationships, because we also talked about how, there's death. And then when there's a relationship death, they can feel so similar. The thing with a death is that it's just more final. So it can be really hard to like wrap your mind around the finality of it. But when you're looking at the death of a relationship, and what tends to also compound it is like you're not only grieving, but you tend to have these emotions down here: the shame, the guilt, those types of emotions that are really heavy. We do so much of this in like the gauntlet, and even like in here a little bit, but just really doing all of that inner child healing to detach from any of the shame, to just accept who you are, to really build like that self-love is like really, really important for getting out of those emotional states. But then coming back to this, like working through a relationship is, when, yeah, I definitely like moved through, like that neutrality part, the acceptance part. And then even I would say one thing that was really helpful for me was just like having hope, in terms of like, like what is coming. So like every morning when I was going through this one breakup, I would write it down in my journal. I would just say something even better and more aligned with me is coming my way. And so that was kind of where I just had that hope for the future, which is also, a higher state emotion. Once you can kind of like work your way through this, where you're like, okay, purge the emotion, I'm releasing the shame, I'm releasing the anger, the resentment, I'm coming to terms with things. You can look at, okay, well, like what was the purpose? And this is where we really look at that, like that reparenting process again, where it's like, okay, this relationship was a reflection of who I am, of the lack of self-esteem that, I may have had. Like this relationship didn't work out for a reason. And so yeah, so he says this, but your partner is a reflection of, your own wounds, your own strengths, all of those things. So you can really use a relationship to say, okay, you know what, I was in this relationship and it was so reflective of the fact that I haven't healed these wounds that need to be healed. And you can just get to this place of using this pain as a catalyst for your own healing. So that way you can actually get to this place, like I said, of enlightenment, where you're just seeing this relationship and you would have life no any other way. You would say that pain is the best thing that ever happened to me. And you may be, all of you guys in here, you may be in a space where you're like, you are batshit crazy, but let me tell you, there are people out there that 100% agree with me, because they've gone through this, because they've worked through it, and they're on the other side. So it's just to say that there is so much healing that can be, really achieved through this heartbreak. So it is again, like kind of coming back to like the light, dark, the like life, death, like those paradigms. It's also like looking at like the, where there's grief, there's love. And so, and also like where there's pain, there's healing. So I just wanted to, like show you guys this, and to just kind of also and I remember somebody, they downloaded it to their phone and they were able to use this as a good visual, because this was a person that was constantly in that apathy, or in the like, even like the shame spiral. And so he'd be like, okay, like, it was just like this visual reminder, how can I move up a little bit? So anything that you can do to move up, like once you've cleared out that emotion.
Yeah,
So
can I jump in for a second, Christian?
yeah, of course.
So, 4 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, my best friend, Christian actually knows him. He's from India and he came to visit Mexico after a retreat. So we got to meet him. But he went through a really, really tragic breakup. And he was actually engaged to someone. He was madly in love with her. When you break it down to the brass tacks, there was a lot of attachment towards her because he had his own wounds with his mother, and they were together for a few years. But point is, when she broke up with him, he was so debilitated because he thought, he had attached. Here's the craziest thing that we grieve also. We don't only grieve a relationship, we grieve the possibility of what we were going to have. We grieve the projection of what we hoped we wanted to, right? That's what we're really losing very often, because our focus is not just on, if it was that we were losing everything we had, we'd actually be grateful we even fucking had that. And we'd be like, okay, that's cool. Like, so I had that until this point. But the pain hurts so much is because we can't have it anymore. You see the difference? That's what we're really hurting from, is the fact that we can't have what we had, even though it was so beautiful, we can't have it anymore. And so for him, obviously, he was grieving the lack or loss of his projected life, which was this engagement, life, this marriage, blah, blah, blah. And so I had to show up for him. And he was like, man, this is really bad. I'm in a really terrible state. And I remember when we were having conversations, we used to have conversations like every couple of days and whatever. And I introduced him to Abraham Hicks, who, if any of you are grieving, and especially in the bottom of that spectrum, they are such a good resource on YouTube to just feel a little bit better. And she's funny and she's like whatever else, but she's a very powerful resource to feel a little better. But the reason why I'm saying this to you is he lived in that space of guilt and shame right at the bottom for really long. And he just couldn't get out of it, and he didn't know what to aspire for, because in his mind he was like, if I'm not feeling really good, I'm feeling really bad, right? Now, how do we define really good? Joy, love, reason, whatever. But it's like trying to climb from the first or the bottom of the stairs to the 30th stair, or from the first floor to the 30th floor instantly without going through the process. So every time you try and you fail, you beat yourself up even more. That's the number one thing about guilt and shame, is that they're so debilitating. When you try to get out of them and you don't succeed, guilt and shame are like those monsters who are like, see, I told you so, you're fucking stupid, you're fucking worthless, you're not going to have it, it's not going to work out. And so it's a cyclical process of how they beat you up. So then your aim shouldn't necessarily be, just as Christina said, to become loving and worthy in the first step. Remember what I said to you. Anger in itself, it was so powerful when I first discovered this, because I was one of those people who, I was extremely angry growing up, very violent, sent to boarding school, and then anger was completely like beaten and suppressed out of me. So I never gave myself permission for that. But it was easier for me to feel fear and grief and like, apathy and beat myself up than to feel anger. So when I started to do the inner work and train myself to feel anger, I started to recognize I was starting to feel more empowered. I was literally starting to feel confident, more capable. And even though we think of anger as such a judged emotion, right? It was so much better than feeling shitty and guilty and ashamed of myself, just by moving to that place of feeling angry. So when my friend was telling me this, I was like, you know what? I tried different things with him, and I said, I want to introduce you to this scale. And I want you to do me a favor. So for those of you who are going through breakups, this is really one of the best tools you can have, even if you go through a breakup later. I said, I want you to look at this every day when you wake up in the morning. And I want you to assess for yourself how you're feeling and where you're at, just as Christina was talking about it. So he actually took a giant fucking printout size and he showed it to me 3 years ago. It was like maybe like 4 or 5, like 4 feet, 3.5, 4 feet. And he pasted it on his wall. And he was like, every morning he was going to take a little marker and check off where he was on this list. And so at the start, naturally, he was so much lower down. But just as Christina said, when he was lower down, he knew my aim is just to get a little bit of fear, to get a little bit of anger, to get a little bit of something else than where I'm at. His aim was not, I need to be fucking full of love and hopeful like tomorrow. And that was so helpful for him, because it felt just like a staircase or like ladders. He was climbing up inch by inch. And then when he noticed, he would wake up and he was like, today I'm feeling angry. He actually called me one day and he's like, dude, I'm so fucking pissed off at her, that fucking bitch and this, that. I was like, good for you. And he's like, what the fuck are you talking about? I said, good for you, because at least you're not shitting on yourself anymore. And you don't need to actually, like in that state, like obviously, like none of us are trying here to be like Jesus or Muhammad or Buddha and be like, oh, I'm completely neutral without any of these emotions, because I never grieve or process. We're human beings, we have those emotions. So I said to him, your anger, you are not going to project it onto her and send her a message and say anything stupid or write a letter. That's not what we do. We deal with our anger with ourselves and be like, I'm so angry, I'm frustrated. Write a letter that you don't send. Write down all the things that you're upset about. Put down in your text. For me, one of the biggest things that helped me when I was getting through a breakup is I wrote the 20 things that were terrible about my relationship and led to all the frustration and pain that I had, because if I didn't look at those things, I would constantly go back to that girl. So I looked at them, I'd get angry, which was better than me being full of grief and guilt and shame. Now, here's the other thing. Some days you may slip down the cycle. Some days you may wake up, just as Christina said, it's about sensing how you feel every day. Some days you may wake up and you're like, man, this is just so heavy. And the same thing happened to him. He would be better and better. And then some days you'll get some reminder or a friend will talk about something and then you feel like you've slipped down the cycle. But here's something you need to remember. All of these stages are temporary. Every single fucking stage, even the stage of love, I promise you, is temporary. If you want to make it more permanent for yourself, you have to do the work to stay there. None of these stages are like our birthright of living anywhere. We do the work to get out of these stages. So then on those days, on a day you wake up and you're feeling more guilt or shame or apathy, What you need, maybe a little bit of ice cream in your pajamas, but what you need more is compassion, peace, self-love, watching more of those videos. I do exactly the same. The days I wake up, I have a very dysregulated nervous system because of massive trauma I went through. So I have like a practice of an hour and a half meditation every morning. But when I wake up and I know my nervous system is more dysregulated than usual, I'm like, okay, I need an inner child meditation around love right now. I need to reparent myself from the aspect of love I didn't get. If I'm feeling more confident, I'm like, okay, I need to do something that's more surface level, like a Wim Hof or like a holotropic, which I know a lot of people are like, that's not surface level, but in terms of like diving deep into trauma. But this scale is so beautiful because also, if you look at a lot of emotions here, like neutrality is so much above pride, above desire, because neutrality, here's the magic of neutrality that people don't really talk about. The Taoists and the Buddhists talk about it a lot. Neutrality helps you not get attached because neutrality allows you to witness and experience for what it is. Remember, I said when we're grieving, also, what we're grieving so much is the future, the loss of what we can't have. Whereas when we hit a state of neutrality, when we've experienced something to this point, yes, we have to grieve it a little, but we're grateful. We're grateful for what we had at that point. That's the ultimate goal, to get to that point. And like Christina said, you get to this place one day where your wounds become your wisdom. Your traumas become your gift. They're the things that have like taught you how to go through this whole spectrum, how to rise above yourself, how to have so much of that healing and that power now that you can now offer and have in your new relationships. If you understand this spectrum and how to move through this on your own, how to create that level of love, acceptance, and joy for yourself, I can promise you in blood that the relationships you have will feel that power and they will be capable of the same thing. And so you will now have relationships in which people offer you back that same level of love, joy, reasoning. You don't have the same relationships of where someone is getting dysregulated almost all the time, or someone's avoiding you all the time, or someone's like hitting you with a massive sense of their own guilt and shame, or they're like projecting it onto you. Why? Because you've created the power of healing to live on this high vibration. And if there's one thing I know that's absolutely true, as much as gravity, maybe even more so than gravity, is the law of attraction. And what you vibrate at, what you are, you will attract. We don't attract what we need, we attract what we are, what we believe. And so that's why, again, in the gauntlet, our entire principle in the gauntlet is subconscious healing, healing that part of you that creates these wounded beliefs that say, oh no, I'm only like worthy of like guilt, I'm only worthy of like this invalidation, I'm only worthy of abandonment. And on the surface, we don't think about that, because on the surface, we're like, oh, no, I'm great. I look at myself and I feel like it's all good. But the proof isn't what we're attracting. The proof isn't how we're feeling in our relationships. The proof isn't how the quality of life we actually have, and not just that we want to have.
Hey, and welcome to the Inner Yats YouTube page. If you like our content, make sure you click the like and the subscribe button so that you get more of these amazing videos that keep coming your way.